So 4.4 is on quadratic formula. So if you remember in 4.3, we worked on finding the discriminant. And remember we talked about how our quadratic formula or our quadratic equation always looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. And remember that we talked about how in order to find the discriminant, we are just finding the value that's underneath our root. And so we found b squared minus 4ac. We did the calculations and we determined if like what kind of solution we had and how many of them. So as we do quadratic formula, this is quadratic formula. And we've sort of touched on that when we first introduced the discriminant. As you look at it as well, remember that the whole reason that I'm solving this is so that I can figure out where my graph or my U shape would cross the x-axis. And just like before, we're just going to solve and figure out what those values are. I think the easiest thing to do as we're looking at our steps is to first find the discriminant. So we're going to say find discriminant. And remember again that the discriminant is the value that's underneath the root. So we're just going to do the calculation of b squared minus 4ac. Once I've done that, I'm now going to plug in the values into my equation. So then we're going to plug into your equation up above. All right, and so if we do that ahead of time, if we find the discriminant first, then we can just put that number right underneath the radical and get our answer. And so then we're going to plug it into our equation. We're going to simplify. And remember again that you can either get what? We can either get two real solutions. And that happens when our value underneath the radical is a number, okay, a real number. We could get one real solution, and that's if our discriminant or the number under the radical is a 0, or we can get two complex solutions, and that's if the value underneath the radical is a negative. All right, and so we get that I involved. But again, the very first thing that we're going to do is we want to find the discriminant. So when I look at my equation, we look at example A, this is my A value, this is my B value, this is my C value. And so step one is to do the B squared minus 4AC. So I'm going to go 16 squared minus 4 times A, which is 3, times C, which is 5. And so in my calculator, I'm just going to do that. So I've got 16 squared minus 4 times 3 times 5. And I get my answer, which is 196. And so this is 196. And we're going to plug everything in now. So we've got m, because that's my variable, is equal to negative b, or the opposite of b. So the opposite of b is negative 16 plus or minus, and our root value is root 196 all over 2 times our a value. Now when I'm saying these values, I'm looking at this equation up here and I'm plugging in this value, the opposite of our b from here, okay, in our equation. I'm plugging in this value, which is our discriminant, which is what we just solved for. So this is our discriminant. And then we're plugging in our a value, which is right here in our equation. So we're just plugging those points or values into our equation, then we're going to solve or simplify. So as I look at this, I'm going to get m is equal to negative 16. Now, I'm going to check. So I'm going to go to here. I'm going to try to find the square root. So I'm going to do square root of 196. If it comes out nice, which means a nice clean number, no decimals, then I'm just going to write down my answer. If it comes out as a decimal, then I'm going to need to either round it based on whatever your teacher is telling you to do, or try simplifying the radical like we've been doing in the previous sections. So we get 14, so it comes out nice and clean, which means that I'm going to write plus or minus 14, and then 2 times 3 is 6. And then again, because of that plus or minus, this breaks it into two problems. I get negative 16 plus 14 all over 6, and I get negative 16 minus 14 all over 6. And when I do the math there, I want to make sure that I am being very careful to either put it in the calculator. If I do one problem, I need to make sure the parentheses are around the top and the bottom. So what I'm saying is, like, I would need to make sure that I'm going parentheses, negative 16 plus 14, close my parentheses before I divide by 6, okay? Or I am going to, or my other option is I could do the top and then do the bottom separate. So if I'm doing the top and doing the bottom separate, I would like combine them, which is 2 over 6, or negative 2 over 6. And then when I write it as a fraction, I get negative 1/3. And I like the fraction answer better because it's more accurate. Negative 16 minus 14, if I use my calculator or just use my head, I get negative 30 over 6. Negative 30 divided by 6 is negative 5. So my two solutions are negative 1/3 and negative 5. And again, that's up to you. I like my answer better as a fraction because it's more exact. As I look at the next one, my first step again is to label A, B, and C. So I've got A is 1, B is 4, C is 7. And so again, my first step is to find my discriminant. And so I'm going to go B squared, so 4 squared, minus 4 times A times C. And again, it's always the same. This is B squared minus 4AC, exactly what we did in 4.3. So we do the math, and again, however you're going to do that, if you're just using your calculator, we've got 4 squared minus 4 times A times C. And so we get negative 12. Now remember, if we get a negative number, we should remember that that is going to be an imaginary solution. So as I go to plug that in, I'm going x is equal to the opposite of b, so it's positive 4, so we're going to put in negative 4, plus or minus the square root of a negative number all over 2 times a, which happens to give us 1. And so now we're going to have to simplify that. So as I look and I can either try to take the square root of 12, but hopefully you recognize that that's not a nice, beautiful answer or number. So we're going to break this down. So remember, when we have a negative, we're breaking it down as the square root of negative 1 and the square root of 12. And we're going to break that 12 down. So 2 and 6, 2 and 3. And so we have a pair of 2's. So when I go to get my answer a little bit nicer, I get negative 4 plus or minus. The 2 is going to come out. The I is going to come out because it's a negative. And we're left with a 3 underneath the radical sign. And then 2 times 1 is 2. And then again, this breaks down to be 2 problems. So you've got negative 4 plus 2i root 3 all over 2. And you have negative 4 minus 2i root 3 all over 2. And what they're going to have you hopefully recognize is that 2 will divide into this number and into this number. And so we can actually simplify that a little bit further to get x is equal to negative 2 plus I root 3. Or same thing here, I can divide by 2. And so I'm going to get comma negative 2 minus I root 3. We can never divide underneath the radical, but we can always divide the number on the outside. All right, and so if this value, the denominator, if the numbers on the bottom is divisible into both of the other terms, into that a term and the number out in front of your discriminant part, then you can divide. If not, then you're done. All right, so let's look at one more. Let's look at C real quick. So my first step, again, is we need it to be set equal to 0. So we've got 2w squared minus 4w minus 3 equals 0. So remember, we want to make sure that it's equal to 0, so I need to subtract the 3 over, which I guess I probably should have shown. So I rewrite it, and then I've got my pieces. So this is my A, -4 is my B, C is my -3. So when I do my discriminant, I've got -4 squared minus 4 times A times C. And so I get 16. Actually, I mean, you do get 16. I'll just put it in our calculator. That's probably going to be easier for you guys. So we've got parentheses. Make sure you're putting it in parentheses. So we've got -4 squared minus 4 times A times C. And be careful that that C is a negative, so we're putting in a -3 and not the minus sign. Same thing with that 4. When I'm minusing, this is a minus that's in between, not a negative sign. If you put in a negative sign, it's going to give you the wrong answer. Okay, so we do the work, we get 40. And so now when I go to plug that in, I'm getting W is equal to -B. So the opposite of the B value, which is the opposite of -4, is +4, plus or minus the square root of 40 all over 2 times A, which is 2. And again, 40 is not a perfect square, so we're going to break it down. This is going to be 4 times 8. And then this is going to be 4 times 2. And I have my pair of 4s. I could go further, but because I have a pair of 4s, I'm just going to end there. And so I'm going to get W is equal to 4 plus or minus 4 root 2 all over 4. And again, whether you simplify first or second, notice on example B, I broke it into pieces and then simplified. I could also simplify first. So I could say, oh, 4 goes here and 4 goes here. So I could simplify this. So 4 divided by 4 is 1, plus or minus 4 divided by 4 is 1, and I'm left with root 2, and then break it into your 2 problems. Again, that's totally up to you. It's 2 different options, but you get the same idea. Like if I broke it down to be 4 plus 4 root 2 over 4 and divided, I'd get 1 plus root 2. If I did 4 minus 4 root 2 divided by 4, I'd get 1 minus root 2. So just be careful with that. But again, it still will give you the same answer either way. When you look at problem D, kind of the same thing. I think I'm going to stop for now and just do another video for the second half.